Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Today's film is the classic that everyone is sure to love, Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama. 1988 film from a very prolific director, David DeCouteau.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with a title like that, how can you go wrong?
That's right, you know. Is that how you How's your French, Craig? David DeCouteau? Do you know this? Am I pronouncing this right?
I have no idea if you're pronouncing it right or not, but it was funny. I looked this guy up today to see if I recognized anything else that he had done, and really I didn't, but you're right. He is really prolific. What I thought was really interesting about him, I was reading in his IMDb bio that his method of filmmaking is that he just wants to make popular movies. He wants to make movies that people are going to want to see. And so he has done like really diverse stuff, and he's directed under various aliases depending on what type of stuff he's doing. I guess at some point in his career, probably early, I would guess, he did some adult films under a different name. And he's also done some, like, I don't know if they were technically Hallmark Channel or Lifetime, but those types of movies, romances and like My Mom Turned Into a Dog and those kinds of family-friendly fare. He's done, and those he does under a woman's name, Mary something. And he's also done some like softcore gay erotica thrillers. So like he's got this yeah, and he's done I think he's got over 50 directing credits. So he's really and he's still working. I mean, he's got movies in production and in post-production. So this guy, he's got a pretty established career.
I'm looking at his page right now, Craig. Don't sell this man short. He's got 131 directing credits.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And he's like, you're right. It's like 5 movies a year. It's insane. Like ever since the 80s. It's crazy. I did look up a little bit more about him because I do recognize him. I have seen other stuff that he's done, and he's a name that keeps popping up, but I never knew to give him so much credit. I mean, bless this guy's heart. I think he's Canadian, and you're right. He just does what's going to sell. And I looked up a quote, and I think it's from an interview where he mentioned that in the 80s was kind of a golden era. He said that home video market was really booming, and basically you couldn't fill it fast enough. So he said it was really easy to sell movies back then. And I think this would be one of those films that he just made for the home video market. And he keeps saying a lot of his movies, they do really, really well, but you're not going to recognize most of them.
Right. And it's funny, like you said, I mean, he just cranks them out. Like I read that as soon as this movie was over, he started his next movie and he just used the same cast and crew. Like, like they just kept making movies. So I interesting.
The other one that I really recognize, because I've never seen it yet, but I always saw the cover, was Creepazoids. Yeah. Do you remember that one? And there's another one.
I don't remember it, but I've heard of it.
Dr. Alien, and he did a couple of the Puppet Master sequels, not the original, but a few of the sequels. So, yeah, well, hats off to this man. He's still going, and bless his heart, he's still making movies, and people are watching him, or else he wouldn't still be doing it. We're watching this one.
That's right.
Now, I actually put this one on the list because I wanted to discuss this with you, not because it's super profound, but just because I have lots of memories of this movie. You and I have talked before in the past about our fondness for USA Up All Night, and that is where I saw this movie. Now, I don't know if it just made that deep of an impression on me that I remember it all this time, or if they showed this movie several times. I don't know if they repeated films on that series or not, but I definitely...
Oh, I'm sure they did.
I remember sitting up and watching this movie and thinking, this is insane. But enjoying it nonetheless for what it was. And what it is a very low budget, I mean, almost so bad it's good horror movie. I don't know. It falls into that category for me. Like, this is the kind of movie I think you could sit down and watch with your friends and laugh out loud at it. And although it's not at the same level as one of our other favorite directors in this category, what's his name? Did the Sorority House Massacre 2 and all those. My buddy.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember. You told me. I don't remember what his name is. But you're right. I mean, it's exactly that type of movie. It's exactly the type of movie that you would have expected to see on USA Up All Night. And you know, those movies often had titles like this. And you know, this is one of those movies where if you look at this title and you look at the cover art, you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine why anybody would go into this expecting anything of, super high quality, super high caliber. I'm sure that it probably did stand out to you as a young boy and adolescent from the same reason that most of those movies stood out to us, because there's boobies and it seems very much targeted at an adolescent male audience. And I think that adolescent males could enjoy it. Now, maybe college age guys, our age guys, I would maybe advise drinking heavily or somehow altering your mind in some way, because I think that it might be a little bit more of an enjoyable experience than sitting down and watching it at noon on a Saturday afternoon by yourself, which is what I did today.
You poor man. What you really need to do is sit down, late at night. You're right, as an adolescent boy, with Rhonda Shear popping in every now and then to do something crazy.
Absolutely.
Handle bowling balls or pins or something like that.
Right.
Well, this movie starts off, sure enough, with three guys who are college-age dudes sitting around. Three very unlikely characters to be hanging out together, but oh well. This is unique because it seems like we have two nerdy guys in the group. Two guys who, for me, were so difficult to tell apart because they looked so similar and were both wearing like the same pair of glasses. Am I wrong about this?
Uh-huh.
And then...
No, you're right.
And then the fat guy, right? The fat beer swilling guy.
Right.
And
and I think that it's supposed to be that these are three nerdy guys. And it's funny because, the heavier one, I think his name is Jimmy. You could see how he might not be the most popular, but the other two guys are these good-looking 80s guys that they just slapped these big framed glasses on. Like, look, we're nerds.
That's right. You can tell they're good-looking under those glasses, but we're not supposed to know that.
Right. Exactly. And the other two, one of them is Keith, and the other one is Calvin. And the only one that I recognized of the guys was Calvin, and his name I think is Andrus Jones. And the only thing that I recognized him from was he was in Nightmare on Elm Street 4. He played the main character's brother, and he fought Freddy in a dojo like a ninja. I remembered that. I remembered him from that. But for the most part, there are definitely, especially if you're into horror and 80s horror and these kind of low budget things, there are going to be some faces that you're going to recognize. But for the most part, most of these people were not recognizable to me.
No. These three guys are sitting. One is watching TV. Is it Calvin is the one who's watching TV? Or is it Keith?
Yeah, and he's watching Creepazoids.
That's right. And I guess Calvin's supposed to be the guy who's a little unsure about girls because Jimmy's basically saying, hey, what are we going to do tonight? Keith asks for a beer.
Hey, come on, you gonna give me one of those brews or what?
No way!
Oh, come on, you gonna suck them all up by yourself?
Sure, why not, they're mine.
Oh, come on, let me have one.
What's it worth to you?
Well, I know we're the Tri-Delta sororities having their initiation tonight.
Yeah? Felta Delta?
And we just might be able to watch. I think that's worth a brewski or two.
Yeah, Felta Delta. And so their idea is they're going to go watch this initiation because it's going to be sexy.
And it's so corny. I mean, the dialogue throughout, I almost have to think that they were playing it for the cheese because it's just laid on so thick, and the delivery is over the top and silly. I mean, the acting, it's hard to even be critical of the acting because you almost feel like I get what they were going for. This isn't supposed to be high quality acting. It's supposed to be goofy and cheesy and over the top. But the dialogue is just so silly. I mean, Keith, I think, is talking about this Felta Delta initiation, and he says something like,
last year, there was a school with great boobs, and Babs makes her wear a bra full of worms, and then do push-ups, deep push-ups.
like, how awesome would that be?
Yeah.
Oh God, it's so silly.
That's what gets me off. Definitely.
I can't say that I've ever explored that particular fetish, but to each their own.
I suppose.
Oh man. And they're just acting so goofy, and like they try to get Calvin to drink a beer, and apparently he's never drank before, and like so they kind of razz him about that, and he finally takes it and he opens it with his teeth. Like was that like a can of beer? A can of beer, he opens it with his teeth. Like, was that a cool thing to do in the 80s? I don't know. I wasn't drinking beer in the 80s, so maybe that was what the cool guys did. I don't know. And then we jump from them over to Felta Delta, where we've got 3 sorority sisters. The leader is Babs, and she's played by Robin Still, who I think was kind of big in the 80s. Well, not big, but she was working. Yeah. And then there's Rhonda, and then there's another one. It was so hard to keep track of who these characters were because they're so nondescript and it really doesn't matter. I mean, those 3, they just are a trio and they kind of do everything together. But they're like getting ready. They're like putting robes on for this initiation, and they're having these really vapid conversations about how the robes are going to ruin their hair and blah, blah. And,
oh my God.
Eventually, it cuts out. It cuts out to the living room where another thing that I thought was funny, apparently only 2 girls are rushing this sorority. And the two girls, and they're just sitting in the living room, like having a conversation, and their names are Taffy and Lisa. And Lisa's the tall one and Taffy's the not tall one. Like that's the only distinction between them.
What are we doing here?
We're joining a sorority.
Thanks for clearing that up. I mean, why are we putting up with this?
You want to get somewhere in this college, don't you? This is the sorority to join.
So what? Who said humiliation is the only way to join a sorority?
I think it's supposed to build character and create a bond of sisterhood.
I think it's institutionalized sadism.
Initiates were not given permission to speak. That infraction will require punishment.
And they stand up, and you realize that they're in their panties and tank tops.
Yeah. The shortest crop tops ever. That was hilarious. That was laugh out loud.
It is hilarious. It is because it doesn't make any kind of sense. I mean, why? I don't know. I didn't do the whole Greek life thing, so maybe that was a hazing thing. You know, I can see guys, wanting to humiliate guys, but I don't really know that I buy sorority girls forcing their pledges to run around in their panties. I don't know what would be the appeal of that. But so the sisters call them over to this table behind a couch, and they make them bend over, and they start spanking them with this paddle. And they proceed to spank them for the next 5 minutes.
It's like nonstop spanking for these poor girls.
And the girls are making these noises like, ooh, ow, every time they get spanked. And it goes on for so long because we see that the 3 guys have arrived at the house, and they arrive outside the front door of the house. We still hear the spanking going on. They walk around the house. We still see the spanking going on, or hear the spanking going on. They look in the window. It's still going on. Right. And what I thought was one of the funniest parts of the movie was they're standing there. I mean, they literally have they can't be more than, 6-7 feet away from these girls watching them get spanked. And they're like, hey, come on, let's find a better view. And I'm like, are you kidding me? A better view? You're basically in the same room, on top of them.
These are front row seats here.
I know. So silly. But they had to get them in the house, I guess. So they go in the house.
But my favorite part is that the house that they go to clearly says Alpha Chi Omega on the front. And when the girl pulls out the paddle to spank them with, the paddle is like beta pi theta. It's like they don't know what sorority they're really in.
God, that's funny. I didn't even notice.
It's hilarious because clearly they actually shot this at a sorority house, and they actually got an authentic paddle, but they couldn't be bothered to change the lettering on any of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that the budget is super low. I think that all of their filming was done on locations. I mean, most of the movie takes place in a mall, and they just had to rent out this mall space. But the budget was too low for them to shut down the mall and film during the day. So the mall would close at 9 o'clock. They would move in and start shooting until it opened again at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they'd have to be out of there by then. That being said, as obvious as the low budget as it is, and as cheeseball as the acting is, the movie doesn't look bad.
Not really, no.
From a cinematography perspective, it looks all right. I mean, the script is stupid. There's some cheap, corny effects, but the cinematography actually looks pretty good. It's really not. It's not grainy. It doesn't seem pedestrian. It doesn't seem like a made-for-TV movie. As far as the camera work went, I thought it was pretty impressive, actually.
Well, my only criticism of it is it seemed a little dark a lot of the times. It's one of those cases where sometimes it was a little hard to see, and you're not sure if it was dark because of the transfer. Sometimes just the transfer to video, things get messed up. Or if it's because that's the way they were going for it to try to create an atmosphere, or because they were trying to hide a lot of stuff. It might be a combination of all three, yeah.
I have a feeling that's what it was that I think they were trying to hide things, especially when you get into the second half of the movie and there's some special effects and like makeup effects and stuff, and they're not very high tech. I think they probably were trying to show or hide rather some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just keeps laying the cheese on thick. Like after they get spanked, they stand up and the other girls are like, "Oh, okay, now it's time for whipped cream delight," and they just pull out these aerosol whipped cream things and just start shooting it all over their bodies. Again. Now, why would this be in a movie? I get it. That would be something that a 13, 14-year-old boy would appreciate seeing. But would this ever happen? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so then, of course, they have to send them upstairs to shower off, where both girls go up into the bathroom together and are both completely nude. One of them's just standing in front of a mirror, like fretting over her hair. The other one's just like hosing herself down with one of those handheld shower wands.
She's hosing herself down for 2 or 3 times as long as they were paddling. It's probably a good 15 minutes. She's getting really clean. Yeah,
really clean. And like she's all sudsed up, and like she'll spray herself down a little bit, and then it'll cut away, and you'll come back, and she's all sudsed up again. Like, she's bathing really, really thoroughly. I guess her mom taught her well.
Yeah.
But eventually the guys, they show up outside the door, and that's kind of what leads to the impetus for the plot, if you want to call it that.
It's the classic 3 heads on top of each other in the doorway, peering in on these girls. But then one of the sisters, it's probably Babs, who comes upstairs behind them, pushes them from behind. They all fall into the room, so they're caught. And so we realize pretty quickly that Babs, Rhonda, and Frankie must be the only 3 girls in the sorority at all, because they're the only 3 that we see, except for some hooded figures that it seems like earlier on there's some hooded figures that walk into the room and just like walk right through it and out.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the 3 of them meet and have a powwow with the other 5. So Jimmy, Keith, and Calvin are in there. Lisa and Taffy are in there. And Babs decides, okay, here's where she comes up with their final task. It's not only to get the sisters initiated, but it's to punish the guys coming in the house. And the 5 of them are required to break into the local bowling alley and steal a bowling trophy and bring it back. And if they do this, then Lisa and Taffy will be initiated into the sorority, and I guess the guys will get their penance for breaking into the sorority house. Why?
Right.
It's so silly. Like, why these guys feel like they would have to do anything these girls tell them to do makes no sense. But in any case, that's where they go. And as they're leaving, the sisters, the Babs, Rhonda, and Frankie, kind of turn to each other and have a little chatter, more inane chatter.
You've got more planned than you're letting on, Babs. I can see it all over your face. Honey, did you forget? Daddy owns the mall.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We can get it so easily. We'll watch our victims on the security cameras. And when they're not ready for it, we'll scare the shit out of them. Babs, you're absolutely evil.
I think they're going to be watching them and they're going to try to mess with them and like try to keep them from getting the trophy or something, which never plays out. They never do anything. They
never
just watch.
happens.
And it's also really funny because she's like, don't forget, my dad owns the mall. So apparently what that means is if her dad owns the mall, that she has a key, I guess, and she can just kind of go in and gallivant throughout the mall throughout the night. I guess if your dad owns the mall, that's what you get to do. And you know the ins and outs of the security system. So you can get up into the control room and watch your friends mumble around the mall. Oh, it's so goofy. But, it's not even, I'm not even being critical because it's clear that this is what they were going for. They were making a goofy movie. So to try to make logical connections and rationales for why these things are happening, there's no point. You just go with it.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? I kind of like it. Like, I love the movies that take place in malls. I just have a soft spot in my heart for that, even if it's dark and it's empty. I think it's kind of a fun setting for this movie that the bowling alley, I guess, is part of this mall or is attached to this mall. And as you said, it was filmed in a real mall, like the Plaza Camino or something in Los Angeles. And that's just kind of a fun setting. So they get to the mall, and they have no trouble at all breaking into this bowling alley because Calvin, who I guess we're supposed to believe is still drunk from the one beer that he had.
From that one beer, right.
As they're all looking for the line to the security system because Keith suggests he can break in and he could cut the line to the burglar alarm, Calvin just leans on the door and falls backwards as he pulls the handle, and it just opens. And then they walk in the door to this bowling alley, and it's dark, and they just kind of stand there and talk for a little while. And then we see that the other girls have indeed gotten into the mall and gone to the security area and are watching on a few screens. And then we get a great scene, and I thought this was maybe one of the best little running gags in the whole film, was our janitor. At least you think he's a janitor because he's in the janitor's closet. He's actually ends up being the guy who runs the bowling alley, or at least has been the night watchman for forever. I don't even know. I don't know if a bowling alley really needs a night watchman, but I just like to think maybe this guy owns the bowling alley. Anyway, that is our good buddy, George Buck Flowers.
Yep.
Again, really recognizable, especially from the 50s and 60s, and not just horror films, but a lot of these low-budget movies and films. Just kind of a charming guy who always basically plays the same dude.
He's got a really distinctive voice, like this kind of raspy voice, and just a really recognizable face. And yeah, he does. He pops up in these low budget things all the time, but you see him pop up in big budget stuff too. I mean, he was in Back to the Future. He was in, we watched it. They Live. Is that the one? He had a pretty big part in They Live, I think.
He did.
But anyway, you'd recognize him.
We also saw him in that train movie with David Copperfield. Isn't that right? Wasn't he like one of the guys?
Yeah, Terror Train?
Yeah, Terror Train.
Maybe he was.
Mm-hmm. And he's coming out of the closet just at this time when the guys are coming through, the guys and the girls. And it's this great shot down the hallway as you see him, the closet door is somewhat ajar and he's coming out. And as they're coming down the hallway, they're backing up against the hall because it's kind of small. And they end up closing the door on him as they're talking. And he ends up locked in the closet. It's funny because the movie keeps cutting back to him just to sort of remind us, oh, remember this guy's still locked in the closet. This will be significant later. There's at least one or two more times when he tries to come out of the closet where, again, somebody not even noticing that he's there ends up closing the door. I thought that was hilarious.
It is funny, and part of it's funny, and it's so stupid. I mean, that's what makes it funny. But they just give him these little one-liners.
Get stuck tighter than an ants.
And just stupid. He just rolls them off throughout the movie. And then there's also later on when he finally gets out of the closet and he starts interacting. I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to this scene. But there's also a big gag about how he can't hear well. So everything that they say to him, he misinterprets and things are said. He's funny. I would say he's probably my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah.
That and the imp that we're getting to in a second. Because what happens... well, I guess first we have to say Calvin is looking around and he bumps into, he comes upon this girl who is apparently robbing the bowling alley. And this girl's name is Spider. Again, another one of our favorites, played by Linnea Quigley, who was really just kind of a a horror queen in the 80s. Lots of low budget stuff. We've seen her in several movies and talked about her before. And she's funny. She's really she plays the antithesis of these other girls. She's a tough street girl who doesn't take any bull, and she thinks that these college kids are just kind of pathetic losers. But it's funny because Spider and Calvin kind of hit it off right from the beginning, and you can tell right from the beginning that he's kind of smitten with her, and it doesn't take very long, even though they're so different, you can tell it doesn't take very long before she's kind of smitten with him too, and they kind of become a duo throughout the rest of the movie.
I like that she has a crowbar, and when we first see her, she's using the crowbar to try to break into the cash register. And then a little later on, she uses the crowbar to open up the chained gate where the bowling trophies are. And then later on, we see her and she's using a crowbar to try to break into like a pinball machine. I guess she wants to get quarters out of it. Like, this woman just runs around using a crowbar on everything. It's hilarious.
It is funny. Okay, so I read the synopsis of what this movie was going to be. And so I knew that what was going to happen, it was basically going to kind of be a genie in a lamp kind of situation, mixed kind of with the monkey's paw kind of deal. So I had read that they were eventually going to break this trophy, which they pretty much do as soon as they get it. And out of this trophy is going to pop this imp. And the premise is this imp pops out and he tells them that he will grant them all one wish, whatever they want. So the plot moves forward from there, and it's funny. And what turns out, Calvin and maybe Spider too are reluctant. They're like, I think Calvin even says,
"Wait a minute, Jimmy.
What for? What have I got to lose?
You don't know what you're dealing with. I mean, maybe the wishes could come true and then go bad on you. I don't know. I hear that's happened sometimes."
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. Way to be observant. But that is in fact what happens. But what was so funny to me was this imp pops out, and it's just like a rubber hand puppet. Like, it's just the cheapest looking thing. And you only ever see it, like, it never moves. I mean, like, its mouth kind of moves when it talks and stuff, but it seems like they just frame it so that you can't even really see the bottom of it. I imagine there was somebody just below frame with their hand up in this puppet. I mean, that's what it looks like. But I just started cracking up as soon as it started talking, because it's a freaking jive imp.
Well. How do you do, boys and girls? Oh, your little faces are just so full of surprise. Well, I'm just as happy to be here as you are.
That's right.
Like, it talks like Shaft, or like it reminded me mostly of like Donkey from Shrek. Is how this thing talks, and oh my god, it's just so funny. I guess I had read that in some of the early trailers they had used a really high-pitched voice for it, and I don't know what changed, but by the time the movie came out, they had switched it to this like jive talking thing, and oh my god, it is just hilarious.
I was thinking they were deliberately trying to channel the plant from the Little Shop of Horrors. That works too. Must have come out around the same time, right? It was 88 or 89 or 87 when that movie came out.
Yeah, sounds about right.
But I love that. I don't know if you looked at the credits for the imp. The imp is played by a man named Dookie Flyswatter. Which is
that's great.
Dookie Flyswatter, which is obviously a name for a guy named Michael Saunier, who has been in a lot of these goofy horror movies like Surf Nazi Must Die, and this one. I guess he decided that this film was too beneath him for him to give his actual name. I have no idea. Anyway.
I don't know, but it's hilarious. And as soon as he pops out, he's like, "I'll grant you any wish you want. What you want, I'll get you anything you want." And so Calvin warns them or whatever, but Jimmy, the heavy guy, was like, "Whatever, I'm making a wish." And so he wishes for gold, and this big pile of, well, it's not even a big pile, a little tiny pile of gold appears behind him, and and it's like, lit with this heavenly light, and there's like smoke around it. He starts going back to it, and he's like, I mean, these are throwaway lines. It's not like these are significant lines, but as he's going back, he's like all excited, and he's like, "Ooh, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to get my nails done and my hair." What? This is this tubby guy with like a crew cut. He's like, "I'm gonna get my nails done and my hair."
I know.
And then he starts talking about all the cars he's gonna buy and whatnot. But I was like, what just happened?
I know.
It's so weird.
And
man.
He just sits and just starts playing with the gold. It's pretty funny. Maybe we're supposed to believe that he's under a spell as well when he goes and sees.
I guess.
Then the other girl, like these are the worst wishes. Well, the one guy, I think it's Calvin or
Keith.
It's Keith. Keith, the imp says, "What do you want?" Keith's like, "Oh, I don't really know," and he pulls him forward, and he says something really, really raunchy. He says like,
"Raunchy." Yeah.
I bet you'd like to bang that bitch there in the sweater or whatever, and he's like, "Yeah, I really would." And so he says, "Okay, coming up," and so Lisa immediately springs into seductress mode and comes towards him and pulls him away. This is another really goofy and silly part of this movie. As soon as she pulls him away, she takes him into, I guess it's the locker room of the bowling alley.
Right.
I didn't know bowling alleys had locker rooms, but this must be a really, really serious bowling alley.
Right.
These guys, man, they sweat when they bowl, and they can't leave. They've got to clean up and go back out and bowl some more. She gets on top of him, and it basically keeps cutting back to the two of them. I guess the idea here is that she suddenly becomes too much for him to handle. This boy who's nerdy, who's never had a girl before. Most guys, I think, in this situation would be pretty thrilled by this. But this guy all he does is sit there and say, "Oh, wait a minute. Hold on there. We've got to talk. Just a minute. Stop. Wait. We've got to talk." while she's straddling him and taking his clothes off and taking her clothes off, and it keeps cutting back to this scene just whenever we need a break from the main action.
She's in like, I don't even know, like panties and like a bustier and like a garter belt and stockings. Like she's all sexed out. Like the wish like made her this big sex pot. And this scene is really funny, but it kind of goes on for a long time. Like you said, it keeps cutting back and forth. He's just on his back like the whole time. And he's not being handsy with her or anything, but she is all over him. And eventually she takes her top off and she's of course got these great big huge boobs, and like she grabs his hands and puts them on her boobs, and it's like he's feeling her boobs and stuff. Throughout all of this, I mean, she is straddling. I mean, they are crotch to crotch, and she's writhing around, and eventually she goes to try to pull his pants off, and he's kind of what it seemed like to me was like she was between his legs, and he was trying to keep his legs spread so that she couldn't get the pants off. And you know, he's objecting. It actually, the tone felt, I have a feeling in the 80s it wouldn't have fazed anybody at all. But with our sensibilities today, it got a little bit uncomfortable because he was saying things like,
"No, I think you're doing this because of some sort of spell. Like, I don't think you would be doing this under normal circumstances." "Oh, well,
Does it matter?
Yes, it does. It does. It matters. It matters to me. Oh, and I think it would matter to you."
You know, really, he's kind of trying to be the gentleman. But the whole time I was thinking, kudos to this actor, because despite my own preferences, if there were a gorgeous naked woman writhing around all over me, that would be and like at some point she's like got her hands on his crotch and she's like licking and biting his thighs. I'm like, man, he must have taken several cold showers either before or directly after this scene.
That is a very good point. And this is Michelle Bauer, who is another person you'd recognize from a lot of the low budget films, and she's a very pretty woman. You know, you're right. It is almost a little rapey in a way, kind of different from the way we normally see, you know, guys taking advantage of girls. But the thing is he asked for this, and it's clearly he asked for this. It's clearly what he wanted, and it's clearly the result of the imp's spell. So I thought that line where he says, "I think you're doing this because of some kind of spell. I don't think you'd be doing this under normal circumstances," was, well, duh. But also, why is this scene going on forever?
Right.
You know,
it does go on for a really long time, and kind of pointlessly, because eventually he gets away from her and he makes some lame excuse like he wants to go get water, and she's like, "Wait a minute, water?" And he's like, I mean ice. Have you ever done the ice trick?" She's like, "No, what's that?" And he goes off to get ice. In my mind, I'm like trying to think, what's the ice trick?
What's the ice trick? That sounds interesting.
But eventually they just split off and they both end up getting killed. And that's kind of what I read on Wikipedia, the epitome of all online sources. I read that this was loosely based on the monkey's paw. The only way that I can see this being based on the monkey's paw is that in the monkey's paw, people are offered wishes and they get their wishes, but it's some sort of twisted version of it. It's not what they really wanted. It's the same kind of premise as like the Wishmaster series.
Yeah, but this is a super lame version of the monkey's paw where we didn't even try to be clever because the first guy's wish was gold. This guy's wish was the girl. And the other girl, Taffy, was it Taffy, her wish?
Yes.
Was,
yes.
She leans in and he says, I'll give you even 2 wishes. I'll give you one now and one later. She's like, really? Yeah. And her wish is, I always wanted to be the queen of the prom. Wow. So he just so I guess the imp he I don't know, apparates her 8 feet back in the room so that she can be in the same spot like the gold was, and then she's just in this cheap looking tacky prom dress spinning around oh, my greatest dream came true. Wow, girl. You need to dream bigger. I know. Did your prom happen in a dark bowling alley too?
Oh gosh. And the plot just kind of rolls from here. The only other thing that I think is worth specifically pointing out is that at first the 3 sisters are watching all of this from the control room, and one of them says, "Oh my gosh, they're getting wishes. We've got to get down there." And then it cuts back to the imp, and the imp says something like, "It's naughty to watch," or something like that. And all 3 girls get struck with this illustrated lightning, and Babs gets blown back in her chair against the wall, and the other 2 get transformed into, they call them demons later. I would call them maybe minions or something. One of them kind of looks ends up looking like the Bride of Frankenstein, and I don't even know what the other one's supposed to look like. She's just got kind of a messed up kind of zombie face.
Was she the one who was obsessing about her looks earlier? Because there's a quick little inserted scene, which I think is of that girl. She's trying to put cream on her face. It's so clunky. It doesn't. It hardly makes a lot of sense.
Well, I guess the gold turns into cardboard or wood or something, and the prom dress gets all ratty, so they realize that things are going bad. And then from here, it's just kind of a really clunky series of events where the minions are chasing people around and killing people. I think the first one they kill is they get Jimmy, the overweight guy, and I think... I couldn't even really tell what they were doing. I think they put his head in that machine that buffs the bowling balls.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah,
and so then he comes out and his face is kind of messed up, and eventually they chop his head off and they bowl with it down the bowling lane. And Uncle Impy is just making kind of offhanded comedy remarks throughout watching all of this happen. And basically what it is these 2 minions chasing down the rest of the people and catching them in odd situations and killing them. Keith goes to find the ice for the ice trick. He's in a kitchen, and one of the minions shows up and dunks his face in the...
Is it the fryer?
In the fryer, the deep fryer, right?
When they leave the snack bar at the bowling alley at night, they really should turn off the fryer.
Yeah, I would advise it, yeah. And the other thing that was clunky was things would happen to people and I would think they were dead and then they would come back. And I'd be wait, wasn't she dead? Babs, after the minions take off, she runs just to try to get out. And Spider and Calvin see her and they're following her because they want to get out too. And she gets to the front doors and she touches the front doors and they electrocute her and she falls over and it looks like she's dead. And I thought she was dead. I wrote it down. Okay, she's dead. And then later she's back. And I feel like that happened more than once. I don't know. Maybe it was just because I was getting people mixed up and I wasn't really certain who was who. It's a series then of these goofy scenes where people are, the tough one, Spider, proves herself to be tough several times by fighting with these minions and kind of protecting Calvin. And so they'll fight with them for a little while and then they'll run off and they'll find a place to sit and have a sweet little flirty conversation for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then another minion will show up and they'll fight and then they'll run off and hide and have a little flirty conversation for a little while. It's really goofy.
Luckily, they get a lot of rest. They're the ones who need it the most because they seem to be seeing the most action. That's where they're developing their relationship. It's so clunky because it's exactly as you say. They fight some minions, and they go and they sit down and they can chat for a while, and then they fight, and then they can sit down and chat for a while. My favorite scene, though, is when they're being attacked and they're backed into a closet, and Calvin is behind her, and she's like, "Don't just stand there, look for something." And so he looks around on the shelving, and he grabs a broom and he shoves it at her, and she goes, "What are we going to do, clean it to death?" She throws it away, "Find something else." And he goes and he finds a gun on the shelf. And he hands it to her, and she goes,
"That's how to do it. I wonder what they clean with this."
And she shoots it.
God,
and I appreciate that acknowledgement. Like, in any other movie, like, they may not even call attention to how ridiculous this is, but at least they did here.
Yeah. Oh God. It's so. I mean, it's clearly set up as a gag, and so many of the things are like the minions eventually both find Taffy, and the way that. the joke is so freaking stupid that I almost missed it. But like one of them gets up at like they knock her down or something, and then one of them picks her up by like under her arms, and the other one picks her up by her legs, and one of them says, "Pull," and they start pulling on her, and that's how they kill her. So they pulled Taffy.
Yeah.
So freaking stupid, but hilarious at the same time. And that's the point after she dies when Babs shows back up and she runs into the imp, who then proceeds to tell her his whole backstory.
Who are you? Why are you doing this? What did you do with Rhonda and Frankie?
Please, so many questions. Let's take them one at a time. I'm an imp, one of the minor imps to be sure, but not without certain powers and magical capabilities, as you have seen. Wanda and Frankie have been made over into demons of a sort.
Oh, man.
Everybody in this movie is kind of wandering around without a discernible plan. It's like you said, they're just kind of wandering around, and somebody bumps into one of these demons or whatever, and they have to have a fight and run away. But there's really no organization to it. It's all just a jumble of scenes. But eventually they do run into our janitor guy. Does he even ever have a name?
Yep.
I'm not even
I
sure.
don't think so.
Mr. Buck, who sits down and has that conversation with them that you were talking about earlier.
It was initiation, and we had to help these two girls get into a sorority. To get in, they had to steal a bowling trophy.
What? Steal a bowling trophy?
A bowling trophy.
What bowling trophy?
It was a large one. It opened up.
You didn't open it up, though, did you?
Well, I didn't, no. But it got opened.
My God. My God, my God. My God, you know what you done? You done let the imp out.
Oh, God. And then you're right. Just not even probably 5 minutes after we had the imp tell the story, now we get the janitor telling the story too. And this is where there's all those, I can't hear you gags, which I actually thought were pretty funny. Yeah. I don't know if I would have thought it was so funny being delivered by another actor, but this guy, he has good delivery.
Everybody who'd ever made fun of or laughed at old Dave, I mean, even just a little bit, they started turning up dead, and I mean awful dead, all ripped apart. It was a terrible thing to see.
Enough, Pops.
Yeah, you're right. They did call the cops. And the cops figured old Dave done it, and they took him away. Poor fella. He died that very year in the gas chamber, just 2 days before Christmas.
Sounds like an awful mess.
No, he never did confess. No, sir, right up until the very end, he said he never done it.
Yeah, it's pretty juvenile kind of humor. Like, we're not talking Adam Sandler juvenile humor. We're talking about, like, 6th grader juvenile humor, but it kind of works coming out of his mouth. And in this movie, at least it breaks up a little bit of the boring monotony of the horrible other lines that we get. But again, that's part of the charm of this film, is it's so much fun to make fun of, and you can tell, like the director said, he just wants to make movies that people enjoy. And I really feel like he kind of hit it with this one as well.
And there was a demand for these type of movies in the 80s. I mean, they were all over the place. Like you said, you could pick them up off the video store shelves. You could find them on late night TV, and people watched it. So, it's not like this is some out there movie. I mean, it's very typical of these types of movies. And as far as these types of movies go, it's really probably one of the better ones.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jim Wynorski, he's the guy I was trying to remember his name earlier. You know, he makes these kind of movies, too. I feel like he's at a different level, maybe a little higher caliber with it. But, well, shoot, I've said it before, like Sorority House Massacre 2, one of my favorite movies. And this is why. You know, this is why it's one of my favorite movies. It's because of this. Because it's so much fun to just sit down and goof on.
Right.
So Babs ends up going after Lisa. With a paddle.
Yeah, because the imp turned her into one of the minions too, and she's like this sexy dominatrix minion, and that cracked me up. I mean, we don't really get to see it, but obviously it's a callback to the beginning where she had the paddle, but now she's got this like giant paddle, and she starts chasing. We just kind of see her chase Lisa with it, and that's it. And then later, Calvin walks into one of the scenes where he and Spider are just sitting around. He's like, "Oh, I found Lisa," and she's like, "She did?" And he's like, "Yep."
That's so true.
Oh man.
Babs shows up. What, did she get into the alcohol or something? And I don't even know where this idea came from, but it just kind of came in out of nowhere that they think that they can destroy him with the imp with Molotov cocktails. Was the idea they could burn him or something? Just a new thought?
Yeah, I think so.
They make a couple of Molotov cocktails, and that's when Babs shows up, and there's a bit of a fight between her and Spider. And as Spider breaks away, quickly Calvin gets the wherewithal to light one of these cocktails and toss it at Babs. And she burns up, and it's another one of those flaming, dancing people shots. And then again, they sit down. Well, all right, well, we took care of that one. And they chat for a little more.
It was hard to keep track of, but at this point, there's only one minion left, and it's the Bride of Frankenstein one. And she kills the janitor. Again, we don't see it. We just, in fact, I think Calvin and Babs like open the door to the janitor's closet, and the minion is just standing there with over the janitor, who's like sitting in a chair, just like frozen. And this minion's just like holding this big knife up above his head, like they've been standing there waiting for people to walk in and see them before they played the scene out.
That's right.
And so Bride of Frankenstein minion chases them out.
And she ends up getting an axe somewhere.
Yeah. Spider axes her head off.
Now, you know, where did the music go at this point? Like, this is the movie where it's like scored under absolutely everything. You feel like if it's not scored, you don't know what's supposed to be scary and what's not. But at this point, like, the music just completely cut out. And I thought, that was an interesting choice. And then I thought, well, did they just run out of money at this point?
Yeah.
But did you notice that?
I didn't.
And I think earlier somebody had suggested, I think it was the janitor guy, had said something about they when they were having their meeting with him, Spider and Calvin were like, well, how are we going to fight this guy? And janitor's like, well, I don't know, but I have heard something told one time about using magic against itself. When Calvin ends up chopping this last minion's head off, the severed head flies through the air and hits the doors to the bowling alley, which spring open in kind of another one of those electrical spark type deals. And he says, oh, use magic against itself, to explain that.
Yeah. It's so clunky. At this point, I was looking at my watch thinking, I know this movie's almost over. Like, it really just felt like they were like, okay, let's wrap it up.
Bring this to a close. All right, guys, bring it in. Yep. And so he runs out the door, and for some reason, Spider doesn't. What keeps her back there? Is it the imp?
I don't remember. It's weird because she just says, go get the car. Like, why wouldn't she just go with them? Like, why would she wait? You know, like, it doesn't make any sense. But I guess the reason is because I was wrong before. I said there was only one minion left. There's still one more. He gets in the car, and minion Rhonda jumps up from the back seat. And the imp is like outside the mall now just watching all this.
Standing in the doorway.
Even says something like, demon in the back seat, classic. Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And so Spider comes up from behind him with some canister or something that she's found, and she puts it over him. And we heard earlier something about how the imp can be contained in a small space. And so she just very quickly and easily, this imp who's kind of omnipresent and seems to be able to see everything from his single perch, you know, in front of the arcade machine, couldn't see, was so distracted by watching the car wreck that he didn't notice her come up from behind and put the lid over him. So she puts it over him, so he's incapacitated. At that point, I think the demon basically loses its power or dies.
Yeah, yeah.
Not before we get the amazing stunt scene of the car flying through the air.
The car flip, right.
And flips and lands. Now, I felt like this car had to be going like miles down the highway by this point. But apparently it was just in the parking lot or something, because immediately Spider runs right out and pulls him out of the car. And then we get the music again. The music is finally there. And it's this sweet kind of we're wrapping it up music between these two. And then the next shot is it's the break of dawn, and Spider is getting on her motorcycle. She takes the glasses off of our handsome hunk Calvin. They get on the motorcycle and they drive off. And it's funny because the dialogue here is like,
So it's finally over.
Come on, Calvin, we gotta go.
Why?
Someone must have heard this, and the cops will be on their way.
Who cares?
You want to explain 8 mutilated bodies laying around?
The imp did it.
Yeah, right. You want to open the can and prove it?
He gets on the back and they take off, and they just leave the imp right there by the side of the...
On the corner! Oh my god, it's so stupid. And like, you can hear the imp talking inside. He's like, hey, let me out. And he's like, hey, you in the front row, you want some wishes? Like... it's corny, but I almost appreciate the fact that it ended on that really corny note, because the whole thing is just such a it's cheese out of a can. I mean, and it's laid on thick, but it is exactly what you would expect it to be. With the title the way that it is, I would think that you wouldn't rent this movie expecting it to be something else. And if you rented this movie with the expectations that I would think that you would have going in, I think that you're going to get exactly what you wanted. I mean, it's lowbrow, it's cheesy, it's goofy. You get some boobs, you get some semi-creative kills that are kind of funny, like with the head being used as the bowling ball and stuff. And I don't know, it's certainly not my favorite type of movie. But every once in a while, there's an occasion where this is the appropriate thing, where you just want to sit down and goof on something with your friends, get shit-faced drunk. Don't just have a beer for this one. Just go all the way for this one. And you don't have to pay any attention to it. The plot doesn't even really make any kind of logical sense. Like, the sequencing doesn't even really seem to match up very well. But it doesn't matter. You check in every few minutes, something goofy happens, you get a good one-liner, you see some boobs, and you move on. So, for what it is, I appreciate it.
I think you're about right. This is kind of in the same league as Chopping Mall, Sorority House Massacre 2, those kind of films. They'd show up on cable. In fact, it almost feels like it was made for cable, because it is not really gory. Even the stuff we've described of the heads getting chopped off and rolled around, there's just really very little blood. There's really no blood spurting, and most of the violence happens in the dark, and even the aftermath is not convincingly, gross. I almost feel like, I don't know if it was just the budget was too low for that kind of thing. Maybe they poured all the money they had into that imp puppet, But it feels like it was made for cable market. It's even light on all of that stuff as well. So, it could probably appeal to a wider audience and get a little more play that way. I'm with you, and I can see that that's probably why that this movie stuck with me for so long. It's just kind of fun.
Sure.
All right, well, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this, please share it with a friend. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. You can also find us on Facebook, where we have a page. Let us know what you thought there, like us, tell us what you think of this movie, and, of course, recommend any other films that you'd like us to do. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.